From the deserts of North Africa to the battlefields of France and Italy, armoured cars played an important role in Allied offensives during the Second World War. Acting like the cavalry of old, they were often found at the forefront of an advance, scouting for and skirmishing with the enemy and their scouts, or screening the flanks of an attack. For the British Army, this role remained just as important after the war. However, wartime vehicles such as the Daimler and Humber armoured cars were quickly becoming outdated, and something more powerful was needed to replace them. The answer would eventually come in the form of the Saladin armoured car.
Attention tankers! We are proud to announce the release of issue 12 of the Tank Encyclopedia magazine. So, what's inside? Let's take a look. First, we explore the history of the Vickers-Carden-Loyd Light Tank Mk IIIB Dutchman, including its development, export success, and little-known combat service in Southeast Asia. Next, we take a look at the history of US artillery from the end of the First World War through the 1950s. This is the first part of an extensive study that will continue in the next issue. We also examine the rare Spanish BMU-2, an experimental Cold War-era armored multi-purpose vehicle, brought to life through detailed research and exclusive photographs. Finally, we examine the Russian BREM-80 armored recovery vehicle, a T-80-based design that was once destined for retirement, only to make an unexpected comeback decades later. As always, issue 12 features beautifully illustrated articles and exclusive photographs taken by our contributors, so visit our store, get your copy, and discover these fascinating stories for yourself. Thank you for the attention, and now, back to the video.
The need for a new armoured car was first highlighted in January 1946 in a General Staff specification for an improvement in performance over the Daimler Mark II without materially increasing its dimensions, armour thickness, or size of armament. Essentially, they wanted what they already had, but better. Britain also had a keen interest in developing 6x6 or 8x8 armoured cars like the German 231 and 234 series of vehicles as a result of combat experience against them. The British and Americans collaborated on such ventures during the war, with vehicles such as the T-18 Boarhound and M38 Wolfhound being the result. As an aside, the Wolfhound is sometimes cited as an inspiration for the Saladin. The two vehicles have some similarity in appearance and design, but that is where the connection ends, and there is no real link between them. Although the British would look at the Wolfhound's suspension while designing their new armoured car, they concluded it would need improvements if it were to be used. The parameters of the vehicle were soon set, and in October 1947, an order for a pair of prototype vehicles was placed with the Alvis Car and Engineering Company. The vehicle was assigned a serial number in keeping with the newly introduced fighting vehicle system, and the FV601 Saladin became the first of the range of the FV600 vehicles based on a common or similar chassis. Originally, the Saladin was armed with a 40mm gun, the famous ordnance quick-firing 2-pounder gun of Second World War vintage. Though arguably outdated after a decade of weapons development, the gun was modified with a tapered bore, narrowing the bore to about 30mm at the end, increasing the velocity and thus penetration of the rounds. Firing a newly developed armor-piercing discarding saber round, the Pipsqueak 2-pounder could penetrate an 85mm plate of armor angled at 30 degrees from nearly a kilometer away. Certainly, this would be enough to defeat any light reconnaissance vehicle a scout vehicle like the Saladin could expect to come across in the course of its duties. The official designation of the Saladin in this configuration was FV601-A. Unfortunately, the same issues that plagued the 2-pounder as a tank gun now arose once more. It was excellent at defeating armor, but the amount of high explosives one could fit within a 40mm shell was considered insufficient. And so the Saladin would struggle against soft-skinned vehicles and infantry, which again were targets a scout could be expected to encounter. This meant a new armament would be needed, as the British were never keen on developing new weapons when they were perfectly serviceable once available. They looked to mount an existing system. Unfortunately, the only one that met their desired requirements was the old ordnance quick-firing 3-inch howitzer. This was, again, a weapon of World War II vintage, except unlike the 2-pounder, the British did actually consider the 3-inch to be obsolete. Debate would continue over whether to continue the search for an existing suitable weapon or to go all in on designing and developing a new one for the purpose. The 75mm M6 found on the American M24 light tank was also put forward as a candidate, but eventually the debate was settled in November 1949 and the proposal was put forward for a new 76mm close support howitzer. Unfortunately, the trade-off for this would be a 5-year delay in getting the Saladin into service. Delays would plague the Saladin as the late 40s rolled into the early 50s. At the same time as France was fighting its own colonial battles in Indochina, the British were dealing with their own in the Malaya emergency, though its banal name belies the brutality in which the conflict would be fought. The need for scouting vehicles like the Saladin was less critical than the need for light infantry support vehicles, and so the production lines set up for the Saladin were instead filled with another FV600 variant, the FV603 Saracen armored personnel carrier. At this stage it was unclear just what would happen to the Saladin. Its placement upon the back burner could easily become an abyss from which it would never return. Fortunately, a helping hand would arrive in the form of Crossley Motors, a motor vehicle manufacturer seeking to restore its ailing fortunes. Saladin would not save them, but they would save Saladin, producing the first 6 pre-production vehicles of FV601-B, the Saladin Mark I. Weighing approximately 11 tons, the Saladin could reach speeds of up to 45 miles per hour. Propelled by its 160 horsepower Rolls-Royce B80 8-cylinder engine. Thanks to a pre-selected gearbox and forward and reverse transfer box, the Saladin could reach the same speeds in reverse as it could forward, helping it get out of trouble as quickly as it could get into it. As a scout vehicle, armor was sufficient to stop small arms fire and shell splinters. The thickest armor was found on the turret front at 32mm. The rest of the vehicle was protected by armor of between 12 and 16mm thickness. Much of this armor was angled at between 15 and 20 degrees, which improved the relative thickness and protection provided. The nose and glacis plates were angled at 42 and 45 degrees respectively. The main armament of the Saladin was the newly developed Ordnance quick-firing 76mm gun L5. Designed to combat the wide variety of targets a scout vehicle could expect to come across, the L5 could fire a variety of ammunition out to a range of 2.4 kilometers, including high explosive, HESH, and smoke. Illumination rounds for night fighting and canister rounds for infantry were also available. 42 rounds were carried within the vehicle. In addition to the L5, the Saladin had coaxial and pintle-mounted L3 machine guns, the British name for the classic M1919 Browning 30 cal machine gun. 3,500 rounds were shared between these machine guns. Although not standard, Saladins could be equipped with a pair of swing-fire anti-tank guided missiles, giving the armored car the ability to engage enemy armor up to 4 kilometers away. Finally entering service in 1959 as FV601-C, Saladin Mark II, the Saladin was organized into the armored car regiments of the British Army. Each regiment contained 1 or more squadrons, with each squadron comprising 4 or 5 troops. These contained 2 Saladins accompanied by a pair of FV701 Ferret armored scout cars. These would be the tip of the spear for any British offensive or defensive operation, operating as far as 90 miles ahead of a main force. These scouts would be expected to seize and hold key fields of view on the battlefield, fighting and holding off opposing scouting forces as necessary. To aid in such tasks, Saracen APCs with infantry could be attached at the troop level, and ferrets would sometimes be equipped with Vickers Vigilant anti-tank guided missiles. In a Cold War gone hot scenario, the armored car troop would also have been called up to observe and report on the effects of battlefield nuclear weapons. Saladin would serve with the British Army throughout the world on a number of deployments. The armored car would see its combat debut in the final years of the Malayan emergency, as well as a brief stint in the British Borneo soon afterwards. The Saladin would prove itself during the Aden emergency of the 1960s, seeing use both as a mobile armour and as a static emplacements within the British forward operating bases. Saladins would also be deployed to Northern Ireland in support of Operation Banner, the operational name for the British Army deployments to Northern Ireland during the Troubles. Part of the reason behind Saladin's employment here was political. The deployment of wheeled vehicles was seen as less aggressive than tracked vehicles. Saladin's role here was largely that of intimidation and deterrence, using the vehicle's appearance to restore control when riots got out of hand, or accompany security forces on patrol. For these operations, the Saladins only had a few boxes of machine gun ammunition for self-defense. No 76mm ammunition was carried, and the gun itself was plugged by a wooden bung. Unverified accounts suggest that at some point of high intensity, requests to unplug and activate the main gun went up the chain of command all the way to 10 Downing Street. If true, such requests seem to have always been denied. In spite of the improved optics of wheeled armoured vehicles over tracked ones in Northern Ireland, Saladin's tank-like appearance was still considered too aggressive. Having begun deployments in 1969, most Saladins would leave Northern Ireland by 1973, though some would stay with Territorial Army units until 1977. Saladin's last posting with the British Army was as part of its garrison forces on the eastern Mediterranean island of Cyprus. Assigned to protect the sovereign base areas located on the island, Saladins were present as the island descended into intercommunal violence, a Greek-sponsored coup, and finally Turkey's own invasion of the northern portion of the island in response. Despite being so close to the action, British forces avoided becoming involved in the conflict. As Graham Collins of the 1st Royal Tank Regiment related, their duty was one in essence of mobile patrols and static checkpoints on a rotational manner at a number of different locations on a week-by-week basis. Mr. Collins also described one event where his squadron of Saladins were hastily called upon to assist UN peacekeepers in the country. In early February 1975, following their weekly meeting with the UNFCYP, or actually known as the United Nations Peacekeeping Forces in Cyprus, the Turks indicated their intention of taking Nicosia Airport by force. The UN contacted the UK government asking to loan the use of the B Squadron 1st Royal Tank Regiment. The story goes that the reasoning was that we possessed Saladins, whose 76mm gun was capable of taking on the Turks' M47s and M48s. Early Sunday morning, we were woken from our slumber, took our wagons to the ammo compound and bombed up, slapped on white paint, put on UN berets. Then the squadron en masse made its way to Nicosia Airport, where we were given individual deployment positions and waited. Come Thursday, the Turks had seen sense and climbed down. By the 1970s, Saladin was steadily being phased out of service by newer tracked reconnaissance vehicles like the F101 Scorpion. By the late 1980s, most had been replaced, but some would soldier on in Cyprus until the early 90s. By 1992, the last Saladin on Cyprus, and the last one in use with the British Army, was retired after 3 decades in service. Saladin was not only a large successful vehicle for the British Army, a large number was sold abroad to foreign buyers. Australia would buy 60 vehicles in 1961. Exactly why they were purchased is a mystery, as they would have been handed over to the Australian Army Reserves only 2 years later, where they would remain for another 3. After this, most were handed over to the Air Force, who would use them for airfield security. 15 vehicles were retained by the Army and stripped of their turrets, which were mated to M113 armoured personnel carriers to create the M113 Fire Support Vehicles, or FSV. These vehicles would see limited service during the Vietnam War before the departure of Australian forces from the country in 1972. One of the first buyers to place an order, West Germany also procured Saladin for service with its border police forces, ordering 80 vehicles in 1964. These were designated FV601-D and differed slightly from other models by removing the coaxial machine gun, as well as replacing the commander's machine gun with a NATO standard 7.62 model. German Saladins were also shipped without smoke discharges. Domestic models would be fitted after delivery. The order was completed by 1966, and the vehicles saw service until 1974. After this, they were leased and later sold to Honduras. Contrary to belief, there is no evidence to suggest that the D stood for Deutschland. It just happened to be the next letter in sequence for a new model. Later in the vehicle's life, some effort would be made in offering modernization packages. These mostly focused around upgrading the Saladin's firepower. One attempt by Elvis was the Saladin Rarden. This design replaced the Saladin's turret with that of a modified FV601 scimitar, alongside the accompanying Rarden 30mm autocannon. Another attempt was made by the Belgian arms company Mercar, this time keeping the turret but replacing the main gun with the development of the Cockerel 9046. The engine was also upgraded to a turbocharged diesel design, producing 250 brake horsepower, increasing the Saladin's top speed from 45 to 55 miles per hour. Unfortunately, neither found buyers and neither progressed beyond a single prototype example. In this case of the Rarden, it may never have gone further than artwork for promotional marketing. How then to conclude Saladin's tale? By all accounts, the vehicle was hardly exceptional, nor do any major flaws stain its reputation. It did what was asked of it. It proved of excellent use in the desert, and a number of Saladins were picked up by Middle Eastern buyers. While it did not achieve the commercial success or combat record of its contemporary, the French Panhard AML, when called upon, it was available and able to intimidate its opponents, or pound them with heavy direct fire support. It garnered a popular reputation amongst those who operated it, and alongside other FV600 vehicles like the Saracen and Stalwart, it remained a defining icon of the British Army of the Cold War era. But what do you think of this vehicle? Share your opinions in the comments section below. If you haven't done so already, we invite you to subscribe and stay updated on future content. If you'd like to contribute further, consider supporting us on Patreon or PayPal. As always, we would like to especially thank our medium and heavy tank Patreon supporters: Dan Fitzpatrick, Dave Shufford, Owen M, Paul A, Ostrowski, R Rob, and Sopworth21. Your generous contributions help fund our research, illustrations, and video production. Until next time, keep us in your sights.